The first notice was laminated. Laminated as if to underscore its permanence, its unyielding authority in the universe of our cul-de-sac. It concerned the precise shade of beige I'd chosen for the mailbox post. Apparently, desert sandstone was a full 2 Pantone shades off from the approved aggressively bland ecru. I remember chuckling, a dry, humorless sound. My wife, Sarah, had merely sighed, the weight of 1,000 future, such pronouncements already settling on her shoulders. We'd just moved to Oak Haven, seeking quiet, a little land for the kids to roam, a place to finally unpack the boxes that had followed us through 3 service-related moves. The ranch wasn't just a house, it was an exhale, a promise of stillness after years of readiness. This HOA, personified by its president, one Carol Henderson, whom everyone called Karen with a mixture of fear and eye-rolling exasperation, was an unexpected variable in that equation. Karen, a woman whose face seemed permanently molded into an expression of someone having just smelled sour milk, patrolled the neighborhood in her golf cart, a tiny, self-appointed empress of minor infractions. Her reign was one of passive-aggressive signage, thinly veiled threats in community newsletters, and an almost gleeful public shaming at the monthly HOA meetings, which were less about community and more about fealty to her ever-expanding list of bylaws, most of which seemed to be scribbled amendments in the margins of the original, already draconian document. I was, by nature and training, a man who preferred to de-escalate, observe, assess, then act with precision if necessary. For weeks, I observed Karen. Her patterns, her triggers, the way her voice climbed half an octave when she was about to cite a rule violation number, like it was a sacred text. The mailbox was repainted. Then came the issue of the lawn's vertical strata. My grass, apparently, was displaying unruly individualism, exceeding the mandated 2.5 inches by a rebellious 1/4 inch. Fines were threatened. I mowed it. Then, the placement of the children's inflatable splash pool, visible from the street, a clear violation of aesthetic harmony. It was moved. Each demand was a small paper cut, annoying but ultimately trivial. I compartmentalized, focusing on settling my family, on the smell of pine from the woods bordering our property, on the way the light hit the old oak in our yard at sunset. I was the county fire marshal, a role that demanded a strategic mind, an understanding of chaos, and an unwavering calm under pressure. My days were filled with inspecting commercial buildings, investigating the aftermath of destruction, sifting through ashes to find truth, and sometimes staring into the void where lives and livelihoods had been. Oak Haven was supposed to be the antidote to that, the place where the only fires were in the hearth, the only emergencies were a scraped knee or a forgotten homework assignment. Karen, with her laminated notices and her petty tyrannies, was a gnat, an irritation. I treated her as such, with a polite, distant compliance designed to minimize contact. I reasoned that a woman so obsessed with the minutiae of suburban conformity couldn't possibly pose a genuine threat. It was a catastrophic miscalculation, a failure of threat assessment that would curdle the quiet I'd sought into a cold, hard knot of fury in my gut. The shift from petty harassment to something darker began subtly. Anonymous complaints to animal control about our golden retriever, despite him being the most placid creature on God's green earth, always leashed or within our fenced yard. Then, nails scattered in our driveway, twice. I installed security cameras, the kind that fed directly to a secure server, the kind I use for official surveillance. They caught nothing but shadows and swaying branches. Karen was careful, or lucky. The HOA meetings became more pointed, her rhetoric escalating. She spoke of undesirables, and those who don't respect our community standards, her gaze lingering on me a little too long. There was a brittle quality to her smile, a glint in her eyes that went beyond mere officiousness. It was the look of someone whose sense of self was inextricably tied to the control she exerted, and who perceived any deviation, any lack of absolute deference, as a personal affront, a declaration of war. I began to document everything meticulously, a habit ingrained from years of building cases. Every notice, every veiled comment, every small act of inexplicable malice, not for the HOA, but for a file I kept separate, locked away, a contingency. The air in Oak Haven grew heavier, the quiet no longer peaceful but charged, like the stillness before a lightning strike. My mistake was in underestimating the depths of her delusion, the lengths to which a petty tyrant would go when they felt their imaginary crowns slipping. She saw my compliance, not as peaceful coexistence, but as weakness, an invitation to escalate. The gnats, I was learning, sometimes carried plagues, and this one was about to unleash hell. The call came at 2:17 hours. My work phone, the one that vibrated with the urgency of disaster. I was already awake, a sense of unease having settled over the house like a shroud. The address relayed by dispatch was chillingly familiar. My own. The world tilted, a sickening lurch of adrenaline and dread. Structure fire fully involved, rural, residential. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional, but the subtext screamed. I was already moving, pulling on clothes, my mind a maelstrom of protocol and raw, visceral fear. Sarah and the kids were at her sister's for the weekend, a small mercy that hit me with the force of a physical blow, a momentary gasp of relief before the horror resurfaced. My home, my sanctuary, my history. Engulfed. The drive was a blur of red lights and sirens. Not my own this time, but those of the responding engines from the county stations. As I got closer, the acrid smell of burning wood, of melting plastic, of a lifetime's accumulation turning to ash, filled the air. A scent I knew too well from a professional distance, now suffocatingly personal. And then I saw it. The glow against the night sky, a malevolent orange beast, devouring the darkness, devouring my life. My ranch, the one my grandfather built, the one where I'd brought Sarah home, where my children had taken their first steps, was an inferno. Firefighters were already on scene, laying lines, attacking the blaze. But I knew, with the cold certainty of experience, that it was a defensive battle. This wasn't a save, it was containment. I pulled up, my fire marshal vehicle a stark, official presence amidst the chaos. My crews, men and women I'd trained, worked alongside, respected, looked at me with a mixture of shock and grim sympathy. Deputy Chief Miller met me, his face smudged with soot, etched with concern. Marshal, God, I'm so sorry. It was going good when we got the call. Looks like it started in the detached garage, spread fast to the main house. Wind didn't help. I nodded, a mechanical gesture. My gaze was fixed on the flames, consuming the roof, licking out of the windows like demonic tongues. The heat was a physical force, pushing me back. The garage. That's where I kept the old paint cans, the solvents, the usual suburban accelerants, if one was so inclined. Any indication of cause? My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. I was compartmentalizing, shifting into investigator mode. It was a shield. Miller hesitated. Too early to say for sure, Marshal, but one of the neighbors, old Mrs. Henderson from down the street, said she saw a vehicle leaving your property just before she noticed the glow. Didn't get a good look, just taillights. Said it looked like, she said it looked like Karen Henderson's golf cart, but modified, faster than usual. Karen, The name hung in the smoky air like a toxic particle. The laminated notices, the petty grievances, the escalating hostility. It coalesced, a sickening crystallization of motive and opportunity. She knew we were away. She knew the layout. She knew. The cold knot in my gut tightened, transformed. It was no longer just fury. It was something colder, harder, a chilling clarity. This wasn't random. This wasn't an accident. This was an execution. A message. She had crossed a line that didn't just exist on a property plat or in an HOA bylaw. She had crossed a fundamental human boundary. She had torched my history, threatened my family's sanctuary, and in doing so, had ignited something within me. Something I thought had been banked low, reserved for the worst of humanity, not for a petty suburban despot. The flames roared, a funeral pyre for my past. But in their destructive light, a new resolve was forged, hard and sharp as obsidian. They didn't know who I was. Karen Henderson didn't know who I was. She saw a quiet man who repainted his mailbox on command. She didn't see the years spent sifting through embers, understanding the language of fire, the science of its rage, the psychology of those who wielded it as a weapon. She didn't see the authority I carried, not just the badge, but the intimate knowledge of how to legally, systematically, and utterly dismantle someone. She had played with fire. Now, she would learn what it meant to be consumed by it, not by flame, but by the cold, meticulous application of the very rules she so adored, twisted and aimed back with surgical precision. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning, and I would be the one to write the final, unlamented chapter of Karen Henderson's reign. The next morning, standing in the sodden, smoking ruins of my life, the full weight of her act settled in. Charred timbers, the ghost of a home. Family photographs warped and blackened, memories turned to cinders. The air still reeked of destruction. My team, the Arson Investigation Unit, was already at work, their movements precise, methodical. I was officially recused, of course. Conflict of interest. But I watched. I knew what they were looking for. I knew what they would find. Because I knew Karen. Her narcissism, her belief in her own untouchability. She wouldn't have been clever. She'd have been arrogant. And arrogance leaves a trail. Deputy Chief Miller, now acting lead investigator on this case, approached me. "Marshal, we found something. In the debris near the garage, where we think it originated, a piece of fabric, partially burned, looks like it might be from some kind of custom upholstery, and a very specific, almost boutique brand of fire starter, the kind eco-conscious folks use for their designer fire pits, not something you'd find at the local hardware store." I nodded. Karen had recently reupholstered her golf cart seats in a hideously expensive and distinct flamingo pink, marine-grade vinyl. She'd boasted about it at the last HOA meeting, a testament to her superior taste. And the eco-conscious fire starters? She'd pushed for a community bulk buy, citing their reduced carbon footprint, another jewel in her crown of performative righteousness. Circumstantial, yes, but damningly indicative. The next step was evidence. Solid, irrefutable. My sidekick in this unfolding drama was not a person, but a system. The network of cameras I'd installed, while the ones on the house were obliterated, the ones at the edge of my property, disguised, solar-powered, and feeding to an off-site server, were intact. I retrieved the footage remotely. There at 1:58 hours, clear as the hatred in her eyes must have been, was Karen Henderson's modified golf cart, not the slow, puttering vehicle of her daily patrols, but a surprisingly nippy, almost silent electric version, gliding down my driveway, no lights. A shadowy figure emerged, unmistakable even in the grainy infrared. Karen. She moved with a furtive, almost theatrical stealth, carrying a small bag. She disappeared towards the garage. Minutes later, she reappeared, scurrying back to the cart, and sped away. Then, the first flicker of light from the garage, growing rapidly. The timestamps were a prosecutor's dream. I made a secure copy, then transferred the original footage to Miller via official channels, an anonymous tip regarding potential evidence from a private citizen's security system in the area. He knew. I knew he knew. But plausible deniability was a useful shield for everyone involved. The police were brought in. Warrants were issued. A search of Karen's home and her infamous golf cart yielded the remaining Eco-Fire starters, a match to the brand found at my property. Microscopic fibers from the flamingo pink vinyl seats were consistent with the melted fabric fragment from the garage. Her alibi, that she was home alone watching late-night television, crumbled when her smart TV's activity log showed it had been off all night. Her phone, however, pinged a tower near my ranch around the time of the fire. It was a symphony of self-immolation, conducted by her own hubris. The arrest was quiet, almost anticlimactic. No dramatic showdown. Just two uniformed officers knocking on her door, the click of handcuffs, the bewildered, then enraged, sputtering from Karen as she was led to the patrol car. Her carefully constructed world of beige rules and laminated notices collapsing around her. The neighborhood watched in stunned silence from behind their perfectly compliant curtains. The tyrant had fallen. But for me, it wasn't enough. Her arrest was justice of a sort. But it wasn't restitution. It wasn't a deterrent. It was merely the consequence of a single, albeit devastating, act. What about the ecosystem of petty tyranny she had cultivated? What about the HOA itself, the instrument of her power? That too needed to be addressed. My home was gone. My family was safe, but traumatized. The insurance would cover the rebuild, eventually. But something had broken, not just timbers and glass, but a sense of order, of fairness. And if the system couldn't fully restore it, then I would recalibrate the scales myself, using the full weight of the authority she had so foolishly, so catastrophically ignored. Karen Henderson was about to learn that some people, when pushed, don't just push back. They dismantle the entire damned machine. And my machine, the one I commanded, was far larger, far more powerful, and infinitely more patient than her little fiefdom of rules and regulations. The ashes of my ranch were still warm, but the embers of my retribution were just beginning to glow. My personal loss was a raw, gaping wound. But my professional mind, the one honed by years of dealing with fire's aftermath, was already several steps ahead. Karen was in custody, facing arson charges, attempted murder if they could prove she knew my family might be home, though her lawyer would likely plead it down. But the HOA, her platform, her enabler, still stood. The HOA office, a small, unassuming, modular building at the entrance to Oakhaven, was the seat of her power. The place where laminated notices were birthed, where fines were levied, where the oppressive weight of her rule was codified. It was a symbol, and symbols, I knew, could be powerfully dismantled. As county fire marshal, my purview extended to all structures within the county, ensuring they met fire and safety codes. It was an authority I wielded judiciously, typically focusing on commercial properties, schools, hospitals. But an HOA office, particularly one that served as a place of assembly, however small, was not exempt. It was time for a surprise inspection, a very thorough, very public surprise inspection. I assembled a small team. Not my arson guys, but my code enforcement specialists. Captain Davies, a man whose knowledge of NFPA codes was encyclopedic, whose eye for violations was legendary. Lieutenant Rodriguez, an electrical systems expert. We arrived unannounced, official vehicles gleaming, badges prominent. The interim HOA board members, a collection of startled-looking individuals who had ascended to their temporary power vacuum with visible reluctance, greeted us with nervous deference. The office was small, cluttered, a monument to bureaucratic inefficiency and Karen's particular brand of chaotic control. Files overflowed from cheap metal cabinets, extension cords snaked across the floor like electric ivy, and the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and toner. Davies began his litany, his voice a calm, damning monotone. Blocked egress point here. Emergency lighting non-functional. Fire extinguisher out of date. And improperly rated for this occupancy class. Rodriguez was tracing a Medusa's head of overloaded power strips. This entire electrical panel is a fire hazard waiting to happen. Non-compliant wiring, breakers mismatched to wire gauge. I'm surprised this place hasn't gone up already. Within an hour, the list of violations was 3 pages long. Each one meticulously documented, photographed, expired permits for the modular unit itself, improper storage of flammable cleaning supplies next to an ancient sparking water heater, a complete lack of a functioning smoke detection system. The irony was almost painful. I let Davies and Rodriguez do their work, observing, my expression unreadable. This wasn't about vengeance, I told myself. This was about public safety. This was about enforcing the codes that Karen Henderson had weaponized against others, now being turned back upon her own sanctum. But deep down, a cold satisfaction was beginning to bloom. This was tactical. This was precise. The interim board president, a flustered man named Arthur Jenkins, wrung his hands. We had no idea, Marshal. Karen handled all of this. We just paid the dues. Ignorance of the law, Mr. Jenkins, is not a defense, I stated, my voice resonating with the impersonal authority of my office. These violations are severe. They pose an immediate threat to life and property. I could see the dawning comprehension in their eyes. This wasn't a slap on the wrist. This was a full-blown condemnation. The final report was damning. The HOA office was declared unsafe for occupancy, red-tagged, effective immediately. All operations within the building were to cease. All files, all records, all vestiges of Karen's reign locked inside a building that was now, officially, a public hazard. The interim board was given 30 days to remediate all violations, a task that would require a complete gutting and overhaul, costing tens, possibly hundreds of thousands of dollars, money the HOA, already facing legal fees for Karen's defense, simply didn't have. The news spread through Oakhaven like wildfire, ironically. Whispers turned into open discussion. The silent majority, long cowed by Karen, began to find their voice. The absurdity of her reign, the petty tyrannies, now seemed not just annoying, but negligent, dangerous. Her obsession with the color of mailboxes while her own office was a tinderbox. My tech-savvy ally, a former military signals intelligence guy named Marcus, who lived 2 streets over and had his own long-standing grievances with Karen's overreach, mostly concerning his ham radio antenna array, had, shall we say, assisted in uncovering some of the HOA's less savory financial dealings during this period. He'd been a silent partner, feeding me information about Karen's misuse of funds, her little slush accounts, things that would add nicely to the prosecution's case against her, and further discredit the entire HOA structure she'd built. He'd also, quite helpfully, discovered an old forgotten county ordinance regarding the temporary placement of modular structures, an ordinance the HOA office was now in flagrant, multi-year violation of adding another layer to its impending doom. The pieces were aligning. The legal framework was being meticulously constructed. Karen's personal downfall was assured through the criminal courts. Her institutional power base was now crippled, red-tagged into oblivion by the very codes it had ignored. But the structure itself, the physical office, still stood, a monument to her folly. And I had one more step in mind, a final, symbolic act of cleansing. It would require careful planning, perfect timing, and the full, unassailable authority of my position. It would be, in its own way, a controlled burn. The 30-day remediation period for the HOA office passed, as expected, without any significant action from the interim board. They were paralyzed, leaderless, and financially crippled. The red tags fluttered on the door, a scarlet letter marking the building's shame. Arthur Jenkins had called me, his voice a plea for mercy, for an extension, for some kind of divine intervention. I had listened, offered him the standard, legally mandated options, which were, essentially, to bring the building up to code or face further county action, which could include forced demolition at the HOA's expense. He'd hung up, a defeated man. Now, it was time for the next phase. Under County Ordinance 74B, subsection C, a structure deemed a persistent public nuisance and an irremediable fire hazard, especially one on county-leased land, which, as Marcus had gleefully pointed out, the HOA office technically was, due to a clerical error in the original Oak Haven development plan from 30 years ago that Karen had never bothered to correct, could be subject to controlled demolition or, interestingly, used for live fire training by county emergency services if deemed structurally suitable for such an exercise prior to full condemnation. It was a rarely used subsection, a relic almost, but it was there, on the books, legally sound. I reviewed the file on the HOA office. The structural report, post-inspection, indicated that while it was a fire trap, it was, paradoxically, stable enough for one final, very specific purpose. My purpose. I drafted the order. It was a work of art, a masterpiece of bureaucratic justification, citing the numerous, uncorrected, severe fire code violations, the persistent public safety hazard, the financial inability of the HOA to remediate, and the suitability of the structure for a specific type of live fire training exercise, specifically practicing defensive tactics on a compromised modular building with known interior hazards. The order would be co-signed by the county executive, citing fiscal responsibility, training in a real, albeit condemned, structure saved money on building burnable props and public safety, removing a hazard. It was airtight. The training exercise was scheduled for a weekday morning, minimal public presence. All necessary notifications were made, all safety protocols established. A perimeter would be set. My crews, the county firefighters, were briefed. They knew the official reason. They understood the tactical objectives. Some, the ones who knew my ranch, who had fought that blaze, perhaps suspected the deeper, colder currents running beneath the official narrative. But they were professionals. They followed orders, especially from a fire marshal who had always had their backs. The day dawned clear and cool, perfect conditions. The HOA office sat there, forlorn, red tags still affixed. A few curious neighbors watched from a safe distance. Behind the yellow caution tape, Arthur Jenkins was there, looking pale. He didn't meet my eye. I stood with my command team, radio clipped to my turnout coat, though I wouldn't be entering any fire today. My role was oversight. Strategic command, the exercise began. A small controlled ignition, simulating an electrical fire originating near the infamous panel as per the training scenario. The building was, as predicted, a tinderbox. The old, dry, particle board walls, the flammable clutter Karen had allowed to accumulate, the very air thick with neglect, it all went up faster than anticipated. Or perhaps exactly as anticipated by some. Flames began to lick from the windows. The training objective was to practice containing such a blaze from the exterior, given the known interior instability and simulated hazardous materials, a scenario all too real for this particular structure. The first engine company laid their lines, directing water not to extinguish, but to protect exposures, to manage the burn. It was a delicate dance, a feigned battle. Then the call I had been waiting for, scripted into the exercise but delivered with genuine urgency by the training safety officer. Command, this is safety. We have a partial roof collapse on the Alpha side. Structure is becoming unstable. Recommend all crews shift to defensive operations only. No interior attack. Let it burn. His voice crackled over the radio. It was the perfect justification. My response was immediate, my voice calm, authoritative, carrying across the airwaves and to every firefighter on scene. Command copies. All units, shift to defensive operations. Protect exposures. I repeat, protect exposures only. Do not attempt entry. Let the primary structure burn. This is now a controlled demolition by fire. A few eyebrows might have raised behind helmet visors, but the order was unequivocal, legally sound, tactically justified by the conveniently timed and entirely plausible structural failure. The firefighters repositioned, their hoses now creating a water curtain to shield the nearby trees and the pristine Karen-approved landscaping of the Oakhaven entrance. They watched, with professional detachment, as the HOA office, the very symbol of Karen Henderson's oppressive reign, was consumed. The flames climbed higher, a hungry, roaring beast, devouring the cheap siding and the particle board dreams of a petty tyrant. The smoke billowed, a dark plume against the clear morning sky, a signal visible for miles, a public declaration. This was not just a training exercise. This was a reckoning. I watched, my face impassive, the heat, a distant warmth on my skin. Inside, a cold, hard satisfaction settled. This was precision. This was the methodical application of law and fire science, a symphony of controlled destruction. Karen Henderson had used the HOA, its rules, its office, as a weapon to inflict misery, to assert her dominance. Now, that weapon was being unmade, its physical manifestation turning to ash before her very eyes. Or at least, it would be when she saw the news footage later, from whatever sterile environment currently contained her. The popping and crackling of the fire was a counterpoint to the rhythmic hiss of the water hoses protecting the periphery. My crews were magnificent, executing the defensive strategy flawlessly. No one questioned the order. No one hesitated. They were firefighters. They fought fires. But they also understood command, understood the weight of the Marshal's word when it came to safety and strategy. And this strategy, however unusual its ultimate emotional dividend, was, on its face, impeccably sound. The roof sagged further, then collapsed inwards with a great whoosh of superheated air and a shower of embers. The walls, no longer supported, buckled and fell. What had been a structure, a symbol of bureaucratic oppression, was rapidly becoming a pile of burning debris. Arthur Jenkins stood across the street, his face a mask of bewildered horror. He looked at me, a question in his eyes, perhaps a dawning, terrible understanding. I met his gaze, held it for a moment, my expression unchanging. Let him wonder. Let them all wonder. My family was safe. My ranch would be rebuilt, stronger, better, a testament to resilience. But this act, this very public incineration, was for something else. It was for the quiet, the peace that had been stolen. It was for the line that had been crossed. It was a message, written in smoke and flame. There are consequences. Some are legal, some are personal, and some, like this, are a meticulously orchestrated fusion of both. The fire began to subside, the fuel consumed. What remained was a smoking, blackened footprint on the earth. The HOA office of Oak Haven was no more. Its records, its laminated notices, its history of petty tyranny, all vaporized or soon to be buried under tons of firefighting foam and water. Later, there would be questions, whispers. The local news would cover it, of course. HOA office destroyed in firefighter training exercise gone wrong. The gone wrong part would be attributed to the building's unexpected flammability, its pre-existing hazardous condition, all documented, all factual. My official report would be thorough, dry, and unassailable. It would detail the code violations, the condemnation order, the training objectives, the safety officer's call for defensive operations, and my subsequent command decision, all by the book. Every I dotted, every T crossed. Marcus, my tech-savvy neighbor, already had a drone in the air, strictly for personal documentation of a public event, of course. He'd later leak the footage to a few online forums dedicated to HOA horror stories, where it would become legendary, a cautionary tale. He'd also, I suspected, be instrumental in helping the remaining shell-shocked Oak Haven residents dismantle the HOA charter itself, or at least reform it into something benign, something that actually served the community rather than a singular ego. As the last embers were being doused, a profound, almost unnerving calm settled over me. It wasn't joy. It wasn't even triumph. It was closure. A final, emphatic period at the end of a very ugly chapter. The law would deal with Karen Henderson's arson. My actions had dealt with her legacy. She had lit a match. I had controlled the inferno, directing it with the cold precision of a surgeon excising the cancer she had become. The moral cost? I'd carry that. It was a weight, yes, but a manageable one, balanced by the restoration of a different kind of order. The kind where people couldn't just burn down your life without expecting the system, in one form or another, to burn back. The sun was higher now, the smoke thinning. My crews began the slow process of overhaul, ensuring every spark was extinguished. I turned away. There was nothing more to see here. My work, in this particular arena, was done. The air smelled of wet ash and finality. It was, in its own way, the scent of peace returning. A peace forged in fire, but peace nonetheless. And sometimes, that's the only kind of peace you can get when they cross the line. They just didn't know I was the one who drew the line, enforced it, and, when necessary, could turn it into a goddamned firebreak. The fallout from the training exercise, as it was officially known, was considerable, though largely contained within the bewildered confines of Oak Haven and the astonished gossip of county employees. Karen Henderson, already facing a mountain of legal trouble for the arson of my ranch, now had the additional, albeit indirect, humiliation of seeing her power base literally go up in smoke. Her lawyer tried to spin it, to suggest some kind of vindictive persecution, but the wall of documentation I had built was impenetrable. The condemnation orders, the safety reports, the county ordinances, it was all there, a fortress of bureaucratic justification. There were no grounds for any claim against me or the county. My actions had been, from a purely legal standpoint, unimpeachable. The precision I had always applied to my investigations, I had simply redirected to this project. My family, thankfully, was insulated from the immediate drama. Sarah was focused on the kids, on finding a temporary rental while we planned the rebuild. She knew, of course, not the explicit details of my intent, but she knew the steel in my spine, the cold resolve that had settled in me after our home was destroyed. She didn't ask questions I couldn't answer. She just squeezed my hand one evening, looking at the news report about the HOA office fire, and said, "Good. Some things need to burn to the ground to make way for something better." Her quiet, unwavering support was an anchor. The neighbors in Oak Haven were a mix of stunned, secretly gleeful, and mildly terrified. The reign of Karen had ended not with a whimper, but with a conflagration. The HOA itself was in tatters. With its office gone, its records destroyed, or at least the physical ones. Marcus, bless his paranoid, data-hoarding heart, had apparently backed up the digital archives, just in case, and was now working with a residents' committee to sift through them for evidence of further financial malfeasance by Karen, and its leadership discredited. It effectively ceased to exist as a functional entity. The power vacuum was palpable. For weeks, the smoldering footprint of the HOA office served as a stark reminder. Then, slowly, green shoots of change began to appear. Neighbors started talking to each other, not in hushed whispers about Karen, but about forming a new, genuinely representative community association, one with transparent rules and a focus on, well, community. Marcus was, predictably, at the forefront of this, his ham radio antenna now a symbol of liberated communication rather than HOA defiance. He even proposed a communal tool library, a radical departure from Karen's every man for himself ethos. The legal proceedings against Karen Henderson dragged on, as such things do. The evidence for the arson of my ranch was overwhelming. The footage, the forensic matches. She was eventually convicted, her face a mask of disbelief as the sentence was read. It was a long one. The public humiliation of the HOA office fire, while not a criminal charge against her, was a constant, unspoken presence in the courtroom, a testament to the totality of her downfall. I never gloated. I never spoke of it publicly beyond the official statements. My satisfaction was a private, somber thing. It was the quiet hum of a complex machine brought back into balance, albeit through extreme measures. There was a moral calculus involved, one that I knew some would find unsettling. Had I abused my authority? Perhaps. Had I manipulated the system for personal vengeance? The line was undeniably blurry. But Karen Henderson had declared war. She had attacked my family, my sanctuary. She had demonstrated a profound contempt for law, for safety, for basic human decency, all while cloaking herself in the petty authority of an HOA bylaw book. I had simply used the greater, legitimate authority of my office, the very laws she ignored, to disarm and dismantle her. It was, in my mind, a proportional response, delivered with surgical precision, not wild abandon. The term legally lethal came to mind. My actions were lethal to her power, her reputation, her freedom, and all achieved within the parameters, however creatively interpreted, of the law. The internal monologue, the tactical thinking, the cold calm overlaying a bedrock of fury, that was my operating system when faced with a threat that required neutralization. The new ranch was framed by autumn. The scent of fresh lumber replaced the stench of ash. The kids were excited about their new rooms. Sarah was poring over paint swatches, this time with a newfound, almost defiant sense of freedom. No beige. Definitely no aggressively bland ecru. We even considered a mailbox in a vibrant, unapologetic shade of blue, just because we could. The new HOA, or rather, the Oak Haven Community Cooperative, as they were calling themselves, was focused on organizing a fall festival, not on measuring grass height. The change was palpable. The air was lighter. My role as fire marshal continued. I inspected buildings, investigated fires, worked to prevent future tragedies. The events of that year were a scar, a reminder. But scars also speak of healing, of survival. They are a testament to the fact that something was broken and something endured. Sometimes, to put out one fire, you have to be willing to start another. Metaphorical or otherwise. You have to be willing to step into the gray, to wield power with a moral compass that acknowledges the complexities of justice when the system itself is compromised or insufficient. Karen Henderson learned that lesson the hard way, and Oak Haven, a small suburban enclave that had briefly become a war zone, was slowly, painstakingly, learning to breathe again. The porch light of our temporary rental clicked on, a small beacon in the gathering dusk. A return to control, a symbol of defiance against the darkness she had tried to cast over us. It was a small thing, a porch light, but sometimes the smallest things carry the greatest weight, a quiet testament to the enduring, unyielding, and intensely personal fight for peace. The psychological toll of Karen's actions and my subsequent strategic dismantling of her empire was something I processed in the quiet hours, when the house was still and the ghosts of memory were most active. It wasn't guilt, not in the traditional sense. It was more a somber acknowledgement of the lengths to which I had been pushed, and the capabilities that lay dormant within me, awakened by an existential threat to my family and my peace. My training as a fire marshal, my years in understanding combustion, destruction, and the human element in both had equipped me with a unique skill set. I understood how things fell apart, how systems could be overloaded, how a small spark could ignite an inferno. Karen had provided the spark. I had merely channeled the ensuing conflagration toward a specific contained target, her infrastructure of tyranny. The slow burn of my moral authority had finally reached its ignition point. The rebuild of the ranch was a catharsis. Every nail hammered, every wall raised, was an act of reclaiming, of rebuilding not just a structure, but a sense of security. The neighbors, many of whom had lived in quiet fear of Karen, occasionally stopped by, offering help or just a quiet word of support. There was a new camaraderie in Oak Haven, forged in the shared experience of liberation from a petty dictator. The silent majority had found its voice, and it was surprisingly harmonious. My sidekick, Marcus, became an unlikely local hero. His technical skills, once a source of HOA contention, were now celebrated. He helped establish a neighborhood watch program, a real one, not Karen's spy network, set up a community forum online, and even organized workshops on emergency preparedness. Ironically, a topic Karen had often pontificated about but never practically addressed. He'd send me encrypted messages occasionally, updates on the post-Karen era, always with a dry, deadpan wit that I appreciated. "Civic engagement is up 300%, one message read. Property values have paradoxically increased now that the Beige Inquisition is over. You might want to consider a career in aggressive urban renewal, Marshal." I'd allow myself a small, grim smile. The legal aftermath for Karen was brutal. Beyond the arson conviction, the financial irregularities Marcus had helped uncover led to further charges of embezzlement from HOA funds. Her carefully curated image of civic virtue was shredded, replaced by the mugshot of a common criminal, a delusional narcissist whose reach had catastrophically exceeded her grasp. The public reckoning was complete. She had flown too close to the sun, unaware that the sun, in this instance, was a fire marshal with a very long memory and an intimate understanding of how to bring things crashing down. The visual metaphor of the fence, which Karen had obsessed over, its height, its material, its color, now seemed particularly apt. She had tried to fence us in with her rules, but in doing so, she had merely demonstrated the fragility of her own boundaries, moral and legal. I had simply redrawn them, with fire and the full weight of the law. The new fence around our rebuilt ranch was sturdy, made of good timber, stained a color Sarah loved. It represented not confinement, but security. A clearly defined line that no one would cross again without understanding the potential consequences. The locked gate, a new addition, wasn't just a physical barrier. It was psychological closure, a statement that this sanctuary was, once again, inviolable. The transition from petty harassment to moral violation had been swift and brutal with her attack. My retaliation had been tactical, precise, and ultimately more devastating because it used the system itself as a weapon. The shockwave of the HOA office's destruction, under the guise of a training exercise, was a masterclass in plausible deniability and strategic messaging. It was a status reveal, not just of my profession, but of my capacity for cold, calculated response when every other option had been exhausted, when the very definition of reluctant warrior was tested. The dramatic lighting changes in my memory of that period were stark. The hellish orange of my burning ranch, the cold blue of emergency lights at Karen's arrest, the cleansing yellow-white of the HOA office, consumed by flames under a bright morning sun. Each marked an escalation, a beat in a grim, first-person retaliation opera. The final scene was quiet. My family, safe, moving back into a home that was ours again, truly ours, in a neighborhood slowly healing from the wounds of a small-scale tyranny. The blood, in this metaphor, was not literal, but represented the moral cost, the psychic toll of engaging in such a battle. It was a cost I had been willing to pay to protect what mattered. They had crossed the line. They didn't know I was the line. And that line, once crossed, could become a wall of fire. It was a lesson Karen Henderson, and perhaps a few others, would never forget. The porch light on our new ranch switched on, a warm, welcoming beacon. Not just a light, but a symbol of return, of control restored, of peace hard-won. The narrative structure of this entire affair, from the first laminated notice to the final smoldering embers of the HOA office, felt like a linear escalation preordained by Karen's own escalating madness. Petty harassment was the overture, her attempt to establish dominance. The moral violation, the torching of my ranch, was the declaration of war. An act so egregious, it demanded a response beyond mere legal recourse. My tactical retaliation was a two-pronged assault. First, the swift, evidence-based operation to ensure her arrest and criminal conviction for the arson. Second, the more complex, systemic dismantling of her power base, the HOA itself, culminating in the symbolic annihilation of its headquarters. The public reckoning was not just her imprisonment, but the very public and undeniable destruction of everything she had built her petty kingdom upon. The ashes of the HOA office were a monument to her folly. My role as the protagonist, the reluctant warrior, had been thrust upon me. My authority, both military in its precision and legal in its execution, had lain dormant in my suburban life, a hidden ace. Karen, the antagonist, was a textbook narcissist. Her control issues inflated to delusional proportions, leading her to believe she was untouchable, above the very rules she so zealously enforced on others. My family, Sarah and the kids, were the emotional anchor, the reason the fight was not just necessary but sacred. Their safety, their peace, was the ultimate justification for the morally unflinching stance I adopted. The neighbors, initially the silent majority, became the beneficiaries, the rebellion fodder, who would rebuild a better community from the ashes of Karen's tyranny. And Marcus, my tech-savvy, conspiracy-adjacent ally, was the perfect sidekick. His skills and his own vendetta against Karen aligning perfectly with my objectives, providing crucial intelligence and support. The dialogue throughout this saga had been sparse but significant. My terse exchanges with Karen before the inferno, my inner monologues laying out the tactical progression of my response, the cold, precise commands issued during the training exercise. Each served to reveal power, dynamics, set traps, and ultimately deliver a form of poetic justice. The humor, if any could be found, was in the dark situational irony. The HOA president, obsessed with aesthetic order, brought down by her own chaotic criminality in the spectacular, fiery disorder of her office's demise. The juxtaposition of HOA absurdity against the deadly seriousness of arson and its aftermath provided a stark contrast. The pacing had been relentless once the initial line was crossed. The ranch fire was a brutal, cinematic shock. My investigation, my planning, was a quiet, relentless build. The retaliation against the HOA office was a burst of legal action, culminating in a moral revelation for the community. Swift and decisive. The sentence style I adopted in my thoughts and actions reflected this. Short, declarative statements for control and command. Power, paragraphs of internal justification and emotional processing. An inner monologue that moved in rhythm with the tactical unfolding of events. Rhetorical flourishes were reserved for the silent, internal punctuation of justice served. Visual cues were everywhere. The zoom-ins on charred documents at my ranch, then later, on the meticulously prepared condemnation notices for the HOA office. The mental drone surveillance of Karen's movements, the thermal camera overlays of my mind replaying the fire she set. The dramatic lighting change from the terrifying orange of my burning home to the controlled, almost cleansing blaze of her office. On-screen text, in my mind's eye, flashed HOA violation notices, then arson reports, then my own official orders, culminating in the symbolic headline, HOA office destroyed. The cuts were sharp. Smash cut to the ranch fire. Slow zoom on Karen's eventual realization of who she'd provoked. Timed beats of Step 1, secure evidence. Step 2, neutralize threat. Step 3, dismantle platform. The visual metaphors were potent. My ranch fence, a boundary violated. Her office, a fortress of petty rules, breached and razed. The porch light, a beacon of restored control. The locked gate, psychological closure. The symbolic revenge was tied deeply to my family legacy, the ranch my grandfather built. My legal strategy had been a tactical operation, using the weapons of bureaucracy and fire code against their wielder. The surprise reversal wasn't that I was planning retaliation from the start, but the slow reveal of the depth of my professional capacity, the fact that they truly didn't know who they were messing with. Karen's own local corruption and negligence, exposed through documents Marcus found, and my official inspection, sealed her fate and that of her corrupt HOA. The climactic confrontation was her public embarrassment, the televised spectacle of her power base burning while she sat helpless in a jail cell. Righteous fury, somber resilience, protective loyalty, and cold, calculated vengeance. These were the emotional tones that colored my journey. My first-person perspective was omniscient only in its planning and meticulous execution. I couldn't know everything, but I could control many variables. The language was precise, weaponized, emotionally restrained, but capable of poetic flourish when the catharsis demanded it. Military and legal jargon were not just for show, but were the tools of my trade, used meaningfully. It was a slow-burning assertion of moral authority. I didn't address an audience directly, except perhaps in this internal summation, this after-action report to myself. You won't believe what happened, but this is how you fight fire with fire. Legally, lethally, and with the cold-blooded calm that comes when they take everything, and you decide to take it all back. This legal revenge thriller, this tactical justice fantasy, this suburban horror turned war zone, this military mind versus HOA tyranny, this first-person retaliation opera had reached its final, quiet curtain. The final echoes of the HOA office fire resonated for months. Not in sirens or alarms, but in the hushed conversations of county officials, the nervous deference from other HOAs, suddenly keen on ensuring their own fire code compliance, and the almost mythic status the event achieved in online forums dedicated to HOA justice. My life, however, began to return to a semblance of its former rhythm, albeit a rhythm forever changed. The intensity of the preceding months had forged a new layer of resilience, but also a heightened awareness of the fragility of peace and the constant vigilance required to maintain it. The legally lethal approach I had taken was not a template for daily life, but a specific, targeted response to an extreme provocation. It was a capacity I now knew I possessed, a tool in a lockbox I hoped never to open again. The reconstruction of the ranch was more than just rebuilding a physical structure. It was an act of defiance against entropy, against malice. Each decision, from the layout of the rooms to the color of the trim, was infused with a sense of renewed purpose. Sarah was the architect of this rebirth, her spirit unbent, her determination a quiet force that drew us all forward. The children, remarkably resilient, found adventure in the construction, treating the evolving framework of their new home as a giant, evolving playground. Their laughter was the best sound, a balm to the lingering ache of what we had lost and endured. My supporting cast in this drama had faded back into their respective roles, but the connections forged remained. Marcus, the eccentric ally, continued his crusade for community empowerment, his ham radio antenna now a beloved local landmark. He'd occasionally drop by with a new conspiracy theory or a perfectly brewed cup of coffee, his presence a reminder of the unexpected alliances that can form in times of crisis. Deputy Chief Miller, my reluctant, legal ally within the department, treated me with a new, unspoken understanding. We never discussed the HOA office fire beyond the official reports, but there was a shared acknowledgement of the complexities we navigated, the sometimes uncomfortable space between the letter of the law and the spirit of justice. The deadpan sarcasm that had been a shield during the worst of it began to soften, replaced by a dry wit that allowed for actual humor, not just the bitter irony of conflict. The cold-blooded calm I had maintained under fire now served me well in the everyday pressures of my job. But the explosive emotional undercurrents had found a healthier outlet in the fierce protectiveness I felt for my family's renewed peace. The narrative of my life had been irrevocably altered. The first-person linear escalation had reached its denouement, but the story continued. Quieter now, more focused on rebuilding and renewal. The public reckoning of Karen Henderson was complete. My focus shifted to the private reckoning of healing and moving forward. The intense personal nature of the conflict had left its mark, but it was not a scar of defeat, but of a battle fought, and, in a profound sense, won. The dramatic precision of my actions had served its purpose. Now, a different kind of precision was required. The precision of patience, of rebuilding trust, of nurturing the fragile peace we had reclaimed. The sentence style of my life softened, the short, declarative commands of the crisis giving way to more nuanced, reflective prose. The power paragraphs of internal conflict were replaced by quieter meditations on family and future. The visual cues were no longer of burning buildings and legal documents, but of blueprints for the new house, children's artwork taped to the refrigerator in our rental, the slow, steady progress of rebirth. The common devices of thrillers and revenge sagas faded as the reality of daily life reasserted itself. The symbolic revenge was complete. Now, the focus was on symbolic recovery. The emotional tone shifted from righteous fury to somber resilience, and then, gradually, towards a cautious optimism. The point of view remained first person, but the feeling of omniscience born of tactical control gave way to the more common human experience of navigating an uncertain future, armed with the lessons of the past. The language style became less weaponized, more grounded, though the precision remained. The military and legal jargon receded, replaced by the vocabulary of home and hearth. My direct address to an imagined audience, the "you won't believe what happened," had served its purpose as an internal framing device. Now, the story was simply lived, not narrated as a warning or a boast. The general style tags of legal revenge thriller and tactical justice fantasy were chapters closed. The new chapter was quieter, more domestic, but underpinned by the knowledge of what had transpired, a silent testament to the lengths one might go to protect what is sacred. The final, uninterrupted narrative block of that period of my life was drawing to a close, not with a bang, but with the quiet satisfaction of a hard-won peace, a family secure, and a community slowly healing, learning to govern itself without the shadow of tyranny. The ashes had cooled, new growth was taking root, and that, in the end, was the most profound victory of all.